Okay, are you all done? Can we all turn off our cameras? Yes? Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome to the second debate of Econ. We have the second virtual meeting about circular economy and shared economy, mobility as a business. You know, in the transport sector, we have also measures for this shared economy, especially car sharing is one of the well-known measures, but also in the last years, new models about shared economy also in transport has risen up. Before we start, I would like to give the word to Melanie Schade. She's project manager for mobility management in the German Federal Institute for Research and Building, Urban Affairs and Special Development, and she is the Vice Director of EPOM. Please, Melanie.
Hello, thank you, Roberto. Thank you. Like Roberto said, my name is Melanie Schade. I'm the Vice President of the European Platform on Mobility Management. I would like to sincerely welcome you to the second debate of the European Conference on Mobility Management. While this is the 23rd conference, it is for sure the first conference that has been held in this format. And I would like to thank the city of Cascais, Mobi Cascais and IMT for organizing this event. With the pandemic, which has a very huge impact on the transportation sector and mobility management, it is really timely and important to have these sessions and talk about different topics on mobility management and also the impacts the pandemic has on mobility management and new challenges. And also I would like to thank the organizers because all the material, the abstracts are on the Ecom 2020 website for you available to see. So the Ecom 2020 was not cancelled, it was postponed to 2021, and I hope to see you all in person in Cascais in 2021. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Melanie, for your introduction. And by the way, my name is Roberto De Tomasi. I will be the moderator today, and I will lead you through this session. We will start with a presentation from Stella Aaltonen. She works for the city of Turku in Finland, and she had focused, one of their team is mobility as a service, where she will speak about what they have done in the framework of the Civitas Eccentric project. Please, Stella, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for being here in the panel. I will approach the mobility as a business from the city perspective, as I coordinate new mobility and transport processes in the city of Turku. Interesting question is, how can we as a city enable mobility as a business? And I have here put together a list of things that I think are vital for this area. And of course, they touch the mobility as a service issue also, but also other areas of the development. For the past 3 years, City of Turku has been part of a Civitas Eccentric project where we have learned a lot on examples of integrating ticketing, on actions needed in order to develop the mobility as a service ecosystem, and on inclusion of shared vehicles into the service. It hasn't been so easy, but we have managed to create a lot of new input thanks to a good partnership with other project partners. And also in other several projects that we are running in the city, we have gained a lot of insight. And so what have we really learned? More focus is needed on the user perspective and in value creation for the target groups. We as a cities do not put enough of efforts on that side. And this is something that we need to do jointly with the city and other companies together in order to create the new mobility services and in order to create valuable businesses. Service design is really needed in all parts of the user experience, and it also starts from the city processes itself. So this is very valuable and often a neglected area of development. Another important factor is that stakeholder engagement with the companies is a vital but often very diluted process. Cities need to be more proactive, enable and systematize and broaden the engagement. This creates trust, and trust is what is needed in order to conceive the actions, convince the actions in a way that we would be able to do things together. In the end, it's all about people. This is a new way of working for the cities, and it sounds really funny to say it this way, but we really need to create a trust environment so that actually there is a support from the city's perspective also in the future. In mobility context, one cannot ignore the importance of the tight cooperation with the entire functional urban area. The traffic does not stop on the borders, and tight planning between all players are needed. This same applies to the national level. In Finland, we are happy to have a good cooperation between cities and municipalities of different sizes, and this is very vital in order to actually speed up and scale up the different processes. We have carried out several pilots with companies regarding shared vehicles, last mile deliveries, and data use. The interest is very high from the companies, but there is a long way to reach the real sustainable business case. The market is very fragile, and in many cases, there are no tools for the city to support and facilitate new cooperation between different business actors. In many cases, the city is not really needed, but the companies need to work closely with each other. And how do we actually support this process is a good question. Then what we have noticed is that companies are eager to enter the new markets, but often the business case is still not there, and there are many similar companies approaching the city. Cities are tight with budgets, even more now with the current situation, and the revenue needs to be received from the market. And this is a complicated actually issue, as we want to treat everyone equally on the market. A lot of focus is put on the use of the urban space. This is important as all of the mobility and transport operators put the pressure on the current network. In many cases, the companies argue that there will be no cost for the city, but in reality, the city is the one facing the feedback from the citizens, taking care of the maintenance, and solving the unwanted effects. This is costly and cannot be ignored, as it is in everyone's interest to minimize the possible harm. New hope is put on the mobility data. I think this is one of my favorite topics on the data issue. Yes, we can do a lot in regards to data, but for example, for the city of Turku, a key value is sharing open data that all actors can use. We also expect that data sharing from companies towards the city will improve. And so that it is crucial for the cooperation and improvement to see the full picture. And for that, we need the data from the cities. And what is important, it needs to be in a more and more standardized form so that we don't need to reinvent all the time the different APIs with different data sources. And also the use of open source code is becoming more and more important. And for many, there is a lot of talk, but very few actions towards that. But in the future, the mobility and transport sector and logistics will be more and more in connection to each other. I believe so very deeply. The sector division is likely to disappear, and we need to be more resource-wise with our transport chains. This will challenge the city in many ways. And I think the virus has now really taught us that there's a lot that can be done as a city towards the logistics. Some of the things that I gathered now in here as a lessons learned are actually included in a new guidelines on how to implement MaaS in a local context. We are now finalizing the document and it will be available very soon. And there you can see what has been learned as part of the Civitas-eccentric process. And I'm really happy to say that a lot of the things is more towards the holistic look at the city. So in a way, when we talk about mobility as a business and a city as an enabler, we need to have all the bits and parts together. And this will only form the full picture. Thank you.
About also the lessons that you learned in working with MaaS in the city of Turku. And yes, I think it's very, as you said, it's not an easy job, and also not an easy thing to convince businesses also to take action, but there in a way it has to be done, and the city has to develop the right things how to support them. To the audience, by the way, you can send now also for the debate. Once again, maybe you know it already, that you, if you have questions or things that you would like have to treat it in the debate, then please use the chat and send them directly. Then we move now to Jeffrey Matthijs. He is from Belgium, and he is the head of Autodelennet, which is a car sharing network association, and we will talk about car sharing in Europe, different models, different impacts, and he will also give some policy recommendation. Please, Jeffrey.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jeffrey, as you said. Thank you for the introduction. And I will tell you something about, first, some facts from a STARS research. It's a project H2020. We conducted some research to the next business developments of car sharing. And then, more important, I will give you some guidelines to make car sharing live as a viable business model. So first of all, I will share my screen, because when we are talking about some graphs and statistics, it's difficult without some screen. So now you can see my screen, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So as far as I'm concerned, first I have to tell you a bit the categories we were working with of car sharing, and we decided to have 5 different types, and we divided it in 3. So first of all, you have the round trip car sharing. Everybody knows it. You have station based and zone based. It means the car, you pick it up and you bring it to the same parking spot or to the same zone. And then you have, of course, the free floating car sharing services, where you pick a car and you can leave it whenever you want. Sometimes it is with pool stations. If you're talking about electrical car sharing, then it's obvious that you have to park it on a spot with charging infrastructure. And then last one is the peer-to-peer car sharing. It's actually sharing of private cars. And also here you can have a division based on the purpose of the sharing. The most common and the well-known is the peer-to-peer car sharing as Airbnb, but instead of houses, you put some cars on the web, and somebody can ask you to use your car. And the other one is actually a small car sharing system between neighbors, where they share cars in a cost-based way. So there's not another platform who is coming together. So those types we researched, and we came to some conclusions. So the history I told already, pretty old car sharing, but you can see that more than half of the car sharing organizations has developed since like 2009, 2010. So it's a rather new service. And if you look at the geographical dispersion, it's nice to see that in Western Europe, the oldest car sharing organizations are all round trip car sharing, or most of them. As where you can see in the southern and the eastern Europe, which have the most new services in charge, there you can see it's more like free floating. So when the car sharing organization has been developed in the early days, most of the time it's station based or round trip, and the newest ones are in southern and eastern Europe. Then this is a very interesting slide, and my last slide. It's the impact of the different types of car sharing. We conducted a research, actually it were our friends of Bundesverband Car Sharing in Germany, and they researched the cars per 1,000 persons in a household. And you can see that it's obvious round-trip station-based car sharing has a very big impact. Only 108 cars are in 1,000 persons when they do round-trip car sharing. If you see, if you take a close look at the free floating, you can see there's no difference between people which are not sharing a car and people who are sharing a car. It's similar. But the most interesting part of this research is when people are combining different systems. For instance, I have a subscription with a round-trip car sharing system, and sometimes I use a free-floating car. Then you see the effect on the car ownership is even better than only round-trip station-based. So that's very important if you talk about business models and about supporting car sharing for local governments. Then one of my or the main conclusions is you have to make promotion and make arrangements for every type of car sharing system. Because we know there is a lot of, not a lot, but some people are saying free floating is not the right form of car sharing because it's not very impactful. And they are referring to the fact that some free floating services are seen as a substitution for public transport because the trips are very short. An average, a free floating car does like 9 kilometers and it takes like 30 minutes or 45 minutes. If you compare it with round trip, there it's more like 5 hours and 50 kilometers. So that's not a substitution for free floating, but for car ownership. But my main point is that you have to set incentives for every car sharing system, because for instance free floating has another target group than the station based car sharing systems. The free floating systems are aiming at a new target group, which is very good because then the business opportunities are augmenting. And now I will stop sharing my screen because so much for the figures. And I want to tell you in my last few minutes a bit about guidelines and policy recommendations. First of all, I have to say local governments are the key players in the success and the business models of car sharing. So it's very important that they take those key position because they have close contact with the civilians of their city and they can communicate with the cities and with the civilians. And another important thing, they have some policy fields which are very important for the success of car sharing. For instance, parking policies. They can give free permits for car sharing systems or free parking spots and so on and so on. Apart from the local governments, also national governments and European governments are very important. Why? Because they need to set a kind of framework. For me, it would be nice when we have a European framework, because then for every local government, it's clear what is car sharing about. And for instance, it would be great when a car sharing provider just had to do one time a kind of examination, I would call it, to be recognized as a car sharing company, and then can do the business, their core business in every city they want. So without having a single description per city. So that's it. So secondly, I would like to say that it's very important to plan car sharing. Not only car sharing, also shared mobility. So don't start it just because you think it's cool and it makes a nice picture in the newspaper. No, you have to consider, you have to set goals and you have to have like a car sharing action plan. For instance, the city of Bremen has one, the city of Ghent has one, and you can see those are very successful cities concerning car sharing. The planning would be starting from today. Then you set ambitious goals, and every year you have some concrete actions to obtain those goals. Then the third one, I already said, it's you need to have a mix of systems. So free floating, peer-to-peer car sharing, station-based car sharing. So it's like an ecosystem of car sharing. We see when that is happening. For instance, in the city of Ghent, car sharing is on the rise. And concerning this topic, it's also important to give some efforts to Mobi hubs. Those are physical spots in the neighborhood of people, and on those physical spots you have a different scope of mobility possibilities. You have car sharing, you have public transport, bike sharing, maybe you have a share lock, so packages can be delivered there, and so on and so on. So this will make it better to have a mix of systems. I have two more. Maybe the most important is the fourth one, but it's communication, communication, and communication. Car sharing is a mental process. You don't start with car sharing from today or tomorrow. So the governments have a big responsibility together with the car sharing providers to give the message every day in different forms, on a website, but also on parking spots, with communication campaigns, and so on and so on. And you have to target also different audiences. And last one, I would say we need some financial incentives, especially with the Corona crisis. Car sharing is not doing well the last months, because in Flanders the use of car sharing has dropped by 80 to 90%. So that's a big thing, and a financial incentive that would be very great and most possibly need to be on the European level is the VAT of 21% or 20% in different countries should be lowered to the 6%, because it's a kind of service to society. And if you do that, the margins are bigger for the companies and they can survive more. And at last, and then I quit, I would say, live the life. If you are a local government and you want people to start with car sharing, well, start car sharing yourself. You can share your own fleet, for instance, with neighbors outside office hours, or you can replace your own fleet by sharing cars. So that was my speak.
Thanks a lot, Jeffrey, for your interesting speech. You gave us an overview about the different car sharing types, and especially interesting were your recommendation, which I'm sure that will be enough stuff also for the discussion afterwards. You told also told us about the aspect of Mobi hubs, and this is also what it leading to me to the next presentation, because we will hear there about MIDI hubs, and this is for a kind of module for cooperative sustainable freight distribution in urban areas. And Dr. Alexandra Anderfluh will tell us about some things about this aspect. She has worked at she was research associate at the Research Institute for Supply Chain Management at the University of Vienna. So, and one of our main interesting theme is sustainable transport and logistics. Please, Alexandra, I give you the word.
Thank you, Roberto, for this nice introduction. Yes, what I'm going to talk about today is more related to freight transport and urban sustainable logistics. And it's related to a research project we are currently conducting, a national research project dealing with the topic of how can we improve the delivery of parcels and similar goods into a city like the city of Vienna. And this research project was triggered by two main trends, which are well known. On the one hand, we have to face an increasing urbanization. And on the other hand, there is the trend of growing e-commerce volumes. And both of these trends lead to more and more deliveries of small goods to the people's home. So the number of home deliveries is significantly increasing, especially in the city centers or the inner city areas. And as we all know, a growing amount of traffic causes a lot of negative impacts in the cities. So we have increased amount of emissions, of noise, and of course also of congestion. And therefore, we started 1.5 years ago this research project where we deal with so-called media hubs. So we want to establish medium-sized transshipment hubs and also consolidation hubs, which are size-wise in between typically micro-consolidation centers, which are quite close to the final customer, and the typical urban consolidation centers, which are typically located on the outskirts of the city. So our media hubs are more or less located around the larger city center. And what we are doing in this project is more or less three main things. On the one hand, we deal with what is an appropriate location for such a hub. On the other hand, we deal with the question of how is at best the processes to organize in the hub. And then what we are also doing is we want to evaluate the impact of such a hub on the situation in the city. And all these research is going to lead to recommendations to support really the implementation of such a hub, because this is always one problem of such research projects, that they are started, the research is done, maybe a first pilot phase is started, but the real implementation and successful running of such a hub is always a bit problematic. And therefore we want to focus also on recommendations. But what I'm explaining now is, or what I want to deal with especially, is the appropriate locations for such a hub and how we evaluate the impact of such a hub. And especially the selection of appropriate locations is often focused on economic objectives. And we think that this is not enough to have a location which is appropriate for all the stakeholder groups involved in such a hub, because the hub is not just or should not only be seen from the perspective of the companies who are using the hub. The other very important stakeholders are, of course, the municipality, in which city the hub is running, and on the other hand, of course, also the citizens have to be taken into account. And this is the reason why we used for the selection, the hub selection process, analytic hierarchy process model. So this is a specific multi-criteria model where we can take into account qualitative as well as quantitative criteria to select an appropriate location for the hub. And on the other hand, we can also evaluate those criteria from different stakeholder perspectives. And then based on this model, what we are doing currently in our case study is we have selected 9 potential locations in Vienna, which could be used as such a media hub. And by evaluating those 9 hubs based on certain qualitative and quantitative criteria, we get a ranking of all the 9 hubs from those 3 different perspectives of stakeholder groups. So we have a ranking seen from the municipality, 1 seen from the citizens, and 1 seen from the companies, the logistics companies. And the nice result for Vienna is that we have 3 locations which are seen quite appropriate as hub locations from all 3 stakeholder groups. So this means they are they quite agree to the same 3 locations, and so those locations seem very appropriate for establishing such a MIDI hub. And this also shows that by using all 3 stakeholder views, we can get a more acceptable result for the hub location. The next thing we are doing in our research project is that, of course, it's of interest what such hub can have as an impact on the city traffic, and also seen from the emission side. And therefore, we use different scenarios where we have, on the one hand, the base scenario. We use the parcel service providers, which are operating in Vienna as a basis. Use this as a base scenario if they deliver all the parcels to the end users or the customers on their own. And on the other hand, we compare it when we use the MIDI hub locations we have found by our case study. This is one thing which we are currently doing, but so the results are not completed yet, but first preliminary results show one very interesting aspect, and this is the best results impact-wise are gained if we can bring the different companies to really cooperate. So that means that they really deliver all the goods to the MIDI hub, but from the MIDI hub, the final delivery to the customers is done in a cooperative way and not by each company on its own. So this is very, this underlines what is also said in the literature, that cooperation is good. The problematic thing is that we now need, let's say, constraints and a framework to really convince the companies to agree to such a cooperation at the hub. And this is one thing we have just started doing now. So we will see in about half a year what the final results of the project are. So thank you very much for listening.
Interesting information that you gave us. Yes, now we have the 3 introductory speeches which are over, and I see already that on the chat different questions have been submitted, and I will starting. One question to you, Stella, from Mr. Neun. He said that he's engaged in a SUM4 working group on data sharing, and he would like to know if you can tell us more about your progress planned to achieve in data sharing.
Data sharing most likely between the city and the companies, I presume.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
the city has limited chances of actually imposing or requesting data from the companies, and a lot of the companies are keeping the data to themselves, arguing that it's a business case. Yes, it is, but the data could be used as an anonymized and automatized way that would be really helping. So what we have done is that in the current contracts or the new contracts that we are doing with the different operators, we are requesting the data to be shared openly, and also so that it can be integrated into our future platforms. So this is something that we can require as part of the contractual issues. But other than that, we are trying to create an environment where everyone benefits from actually sharing the data and showcasing the model ourselves. So we are opening a lot of our data sets. They are free to use, and several companies have benefited from those and are actually using them in their apps and services. So this is really important part. And also in our developments in the future, we are requesting open source code so that the code can be used and developed further by the other players in the game.
Okay, so one question of me also related to what do you have said, where you have mentioned different intervention, different themes which you are working on this overall subject of mobility as a service, which is for you, or by your experience, the most hardly thematic to work in? Also in relation with cooperation with privates and so on.
I think the hardest part is actually to really have a shared trust and shared understanding of what we are aiming. So this is hard, and also developing interfaces, APIs that are actually beneficial for all and accessible. It becomes really fast an issue of technological integration, especially in the mobility as a service. And this is in many cases very tricky, because a lot of the operators are working in dependent on each other. And if the timing of one actor fails, it affects the whole lot of other companies and their timetables. So this is a really interdependent system where everyone's sort of failure affects the other ones. So this is an area which is really challenging, and it's not typically something that the cities are working with. And it actually questions a lot of the company's core competencies and core business cases. And this is really a tricky issue. And another thing is that in order to put some operations together, we need to first have the physical services in place. And as referred to my colleagues, by the car sharing companies and by the mini hubs and these sort of systems, we need something to share and something to hop and hop off. So to lure the different companies to come to a smaller sized city, I mean, we are not a big city. City of Turku has a bit less than 200,000 inhabitants. In the region, 380,000 inhabitants. This is not the hip place to come as a company. You'd like to go to bigger places where there's a potential number of customers is higher. So actually to lure the companies and enable that they really have a business case, so enough of users. So this is not a simple issue of only for the city, but also for the company.
So there must be a business case. But you told at the beginning that you have to create trust. So what are the main obstacles from the part of the privates to what they are afraid of?
Well, especially if you bring more than one company on a table, it becomes a silence of secrecy. Who reveals what? So in that sense, if I'm really honest. So how do you create a trust that the companies are actually benefiting from each other? And everyone wins when they all have users and they are all able to get more and more revenue, for example, from the stream. So it's not a competition in the end. So that is really hard. And this is something that the city's normal role is not to mediate and facilitate the companies' negotiations between themselves. And this is a hard area, at least to my own personal
area. And I think also an area which needs a lot of time and also a lot of bilateral discussions with each partner, I guess.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So another question which was posed to Jeffrey. The simple question is, who finances the car sharing system?
Well, it's a customer, of course, but as we see that the business model for car sharing is not that viable and zich without having a lot of potential, a lot of users, as my former speaker was telling, 200,000 inhabitants is not that much, but it can be done. But then you need the local government to support the car sharing provider. And in Flanders, for instance, we have different cities who are saying to the car sharing provider, well, for the first 2 years or 3 years, we're going to make your business case at least break even. So, for instance, when the users are spending like 500 euros a month to one particular car, and the car sharing provider needs 700 to have a viable business model, well, the 200 euros has been paid by the city. And this for like 2 to 3 years, because that's normally the time it takes to make car sharing profitable, 3 years at least.
Okay, and that is also evident about regarding also other car sharing providers all over Europe, that there is a need of financial support in the first three years.
Yes, but it's not only financial, as I said, it's also very important that cities who want to achieve car sharing successful, then it has to be the whole picture. You have to plan it, and you have to take your part in the communication, and maybe you need to give the good practice and start sharing yourself, because it's a mental process. So it takes a lot of effort from the provider, but also for the local government to make car sharing work in a specific city.
And what are your what is the case in Belgium, and also about the cooperation between the public authorities and the car sharing providers? Is this good? Is this
yeah
difficult?
Well, I would say that a lot of local governments are supporting car sharing on a good way. I think from the 300 communities or cities or villages, how do we call it? There are already 50 who had make a car sharing plan, so they know what they're going to do the next 5 years, and also more than 50 are sharing their own fleet in order to make a viable business model for the car sharing providers. So I would say it's very good. However, we see that the oldest car sharing company in Belgium has a deal with public transport, and that is for a bit subsidized by the government, national government. So some of the car sharing providers don't think that's a level play field, and sometimes there's a little bit discussion about these topics.
So you mean that it's good to have a deal with the public transport companies for a car sharing provider?
Yeah, of course. And as far as I'm concerned, well, public transport and car sharing are the same. They are perfect complementary. When I use public transport, it's very easy to have now and then a car for my own, so I can start car sharing for the last mile, the first mile, but also for going groceries or the container unit. So that's very important. But my suggestion would be that public transport is not aiming at one car sharing provider, but is aiming at the sector of car sharing and make deals with every provider or a lot of providers.
So what I'm asking you that because we have also a car sharing system in Switzerland, which is very well running, but it's only one provider for whole Switzerland. You know them for sure, and they had the real coming out of this company was when they made a deal or an agreement with the Federal Swiss Railways. And that was especially in marketing and communication. And also, and that's important, that the Federal Railways gave them parking space at the railway station. And I think that was a crucial point here, so for Rise Up as a system. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you name a parking spot. I think that's very important in different ways, because station-based needs to have parking spots because that's the system. It's defined by that. And people like it. We have done a big survey, and people who are choosing for station-based are liking the fact that they always know where the car stands, and also that they never have to look for a parking spot when they return. So that's a very, very big advantage. And also, the best communication ever is just making a parking spot and put a plate on it, car sharing, because people are passing it every day. So that's the best communication you can think.
Yeah. One other question concerning to you. It's written here from Ana Isabel Cosme Gomes that regarding the situation that we have and this COVID pandemic situation, the fear of passenger public transport, of the fear of the persons to use public transport. Couldn't be possible to anticipate the evolution of the car sharing systems. And yes, what do you think?
So if I am have it correct, what is the place of car sharing in the Corona crisis, and how can we avoid a kind of hygienic discussion about public transport and car sharing?
Yes, in a way, yes, and also how to rise up more car sharing, but because it seems that public transport is not so liked in this moment.
Yeah, well, I think the answer is very simple. Car sharing can be a replacement for the lack of capacity of public transport nowadays, because in one bus, not that many people can fit as they did before the Corona crisis because of the social distancing. So all those people could start making use of a shared car in complementary of public transport. But not only car sharing, also bike sharing has a big part in this play. So if you combine all those things, then I think you can fulfill the capacity problem of the public transport. And maybe one more thing, people are saying to me, well, it's not hygienic to use a shared car because of the virus and so on and so on. But that's not a scientific correct thing, because if you just make sure you do the right precautions, like wash your hands and don't touch your face and so on, it's even safer than going to the supermarket.
Okay. Another question which came in now also regarding to you. What are the fundamental steps for the planning and the implementation of a car sharing system on a local context? Maybe you already said this also in your speech, but maybe you can focus on really once again on these fundamental steps.
Yeah, I think one thing I didn't mention is the first fundamental step is there is a policy that supports the action plan. So it has to be supported by the whole city, so the policy of the city. And that's why you're making a plan, because every, I don't know the word, but every councillor should sign the car sharing action plan. That's the first thing. The second thing, you have to set ambitious goals, and also they have to be reachable. And then you have you need concrete actions every year to reach the target. And with concrete actions, I mean, for instance, start sharing your own fleet in the first year. Do 2 communication campaigns targeted to special target groups, for instance, or special regions in your city. Make sure that you also have financial incentives. That's very important, because as I said, it takes like 3 years, maybe more, to have a viable business model. Well, local governments can support that, and it doesn't cost that many. If you see the amounts of budget local governments spend to other things, then you easily can spend 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 euros to a car sharing, and it will pay for you, because when the car sharing is viable, more shared cars will take in place. And last very important thing, I couldn't stress enough, that's make sure that you promote every form of car sharing, especially when you are in a city that's more like rural or suburban and there are not many people. Then you have to be sure that you also support private car sharing, because almost every time it's the first step to go to the real car sharing, or the car sharing with the fleet-based system. So those are 4 things I think that are very crucial. And maybe one last, because you need to have one person or one service from the community or the city that is responsible for car sharing in your city, because car sharing touches different fields. For instance, new building projects, social welfare, parking management, and so on. And one people has to have like a helicopter view, and also can do like a kind of car sharing test with every project you do.
But how, I mean, how do you deal with different car sharing providers which are on the market when you are responsible responsible of the city which is dealing with car sharing?
Well, that's there is very important to have a framework. And we see in Flanders that several cities have their own framework to be allowed to be active in the city field. But the best thing is to have it on a national level or even on a European level, because those rules can make sure that when you allow somebody in your city, a car sharing provider, it's a car sharing provider who is dealing with impact, who is doing the car sharing like it should be, and so on and so on. And also, you need to have a contract with every car sharing provider, and you give something, but the car sharing provider is also giving something to you. For instance, they have to be there at least for the coming 5 years, whether it's a good business model or not. For instance, they need to share data every year about usage of the car sharing system, about the profiles of the users, and so on and so on. So in that way, you create, I think, a kind of trust, and every party is doing where they are best in. So the business model is for the car sharing provider, their core business, local government is supporting, and together they are making car sharing work.
Thanks, Jeffrey, for your comments, and I would like to move it a little bit forward to the theme which Alexandra tackled about those mini hubs. As you said us in your speech, you are on a research level now, and what will be the next steps then regarding the implementation? How is this plan afterwards? What is
Yeah, thanks for the question, Roberto. As I said, this is a research project. So what we are doing now is checking all the necessary information to be able to, in the next step after this project is finished, to really start the pilot phase. And what we need for that is, because the municipality of Vienna is also part of our research project now, and they really want to start such mini hubs. And therefore, we are doing now the research phase, and based on the results of the research phase, in the next step, we then want to really implement such mini hubs. But before we can really start this, we need to figure out where to locate the mini hubs, how to run the mini hubs, which operators should be used, which business model should be used, and so on. And therefore, this research project is really prerequisite before starting the implementation phase.
Okay. That means that all the things, I think also the business models and so on, you will do it together with the operators, with possible operators.
Yes, we have the municipality of Vienna in our project, and we have also parcel logistics providers in our project as associated partners. So we also get information from those companies. This is also necessary because those companies should then use the mini hubs. And if we really include their requirements and their needs in the implementation, then we expect that it's more successful than just saying, okay, we have now a mini hub and now please use it. That's not enough. And that's not successful.
Okay. Did you have already did you have already contact with these possible private companies?
We have first contacts, and what we are currently working on is who should really operate such a media hub, because there are different views on this aspect. On the one hand, it could, of course, be operated by the municipality itself. But on the other hand, the municipality should not work as a company, and this would mean working as a company if they are the operator of such a hub. And therefore, what we are figuring out now is how this business model could really look like. What we know from the companies who should transship their goods via the media hub, so the parcel service providers, is that they want an independent operator. So they will never agree if one of the parcel service providers itself is the operator of the media hub. That won't work, that's for sure. So it has to be an independent company who runs the media hub.
And this, how it will be financed?
This is also one thing we are currently working out. What we can say already is similar to the car sharing thing. In the first years, financial support from the municipality will be necessary. Otherwise, it won't work, because it takes also time till you have enough companies really using your media hub. So we estimate at least 3 years or 3 to 5 years it would be necessary to have financial support. And then in this time, the business model must be set up in such a way that the hub can finance itself.
Okay. Do you know already from existing media hubs all over Europe which are working?
Yeah, media hubs in this sense not, because they are typically located on the outskirts of the city, but there are some of those similar consolidation centers which do already work. For example, in the Netherlands, there is Binnenstad Service, who established a similar process, but they use the idea that so one thing is they focus especially on business to business, B2B transport. And in this case, the shops in the city say, okay, we want to be delivered via this hub. And then the companies delivering the goods are more or less forced to use the media hub. So this is one thing you can use. What we are currently focusing on more is to establish regulations in the city which make it also viable from an economic point of view for the companies to use the media hub. So the city of Vienna is discussing about setting up additional regulations in the city center, which could make it interesting for the companies to use the hub, even from an economic point of view, because then it's cheaper for them to use the media hub than transporting the goods to the final customers themselves.
Mm. And regarding the last mile, you know, from the media hub to the direct at the end, or what are you thinking about how the goods should be delivered then? What
we assume in our research project is that for this last mile, we use on the one hand electric vehicles for the customers who require a larger amount of goods at one delivery spot, or if the distance is farther away from the media hub. And for the customers who are very near to the media hub, or which just need 1 or 2 parcels, we also consider the use of cargo bikes to really reduce emissions and also some amount of congestion in the city center.
Okay, it is also planned that you make also a kind of a network of micro hubs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting that you mention it, because we currently we have a second research project where we are concentrating on such a network of micro hubs. And what we plan to do is, because they are the end of the projects of both projects is all end of this year. And what we want to do is to combine then the results of both research projects, because then we can really figure out a more or less optimal plan for Vienna. Okay. And we think it would make sense. First, what we have already seen, it's not enough to have just one MIDI hub. We need a number of MIDI hubs around the city center, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. And the next thing is it would also make sense to have additional micro hubs. We think it would make sense, but we wait for the results of the other research project, and then we want to combine all the results to really implement a working pilot hub system.
One question, not directly related to MIDI hubs, you know, but which Paolo Marques posed is we have an increment of e-commerce during the pandemic situation, and in general, we have also the situation that e-commerce is increasing. That means more home deliveries, and what are the measures that you take to account to counter the increase in terms of pollution and traffic congestion? I think media hubs and so on, and this now and this new approach of urban goods deliveries, of course, one that you will do, but do you will also make other things? Or the
one thing that has already started is, of course, that the companies who deliver the parcels have already started to use electric vehicles, for example, to reduce at least emissions in the city center by using this low emission vehicles. MIDI hubs, of course, as you have all mentioned, is our approach how we want to reduce this issue. And as I've mentioned in the final part of my speech is it's cooperation, because what we can see, especially in Vienna nowadays, is that we have several companies who deliver parcels to the final customers. And along one street, we have all companies, one after the other, trying to find a parking spot to deliver goods to exactly the same final customer. And really to reduce this number of trips to certain customers is only achievable to our point of view if we really bring the companies to cooperate and to really agree that the final customers in the city center, no matter which company has done the first part of the delivery, is then done in a corporate combined way just by one company. So this is one thing I am convinced is necessary to really reduce the negative effects of the increasing number of home deliveries.
Stella, what are you doing in terms of urban freight transport?
What we are doing is partly what Alexandra was already telling, is that we are encouraging the last mile delivery to be done by e-cargo bikes. And we have already 3 companies delivering by e-cargo bikes, and then they are much more efficient in the delivery. Of course, they don't want to reveal really how efficient they are because of the data secrecy and not showing others how efficient that is, but several percentages more efficient, especially because there's no need for these parking search, as was mentioned before. So we are encouraging that and having pilots on that area. And then also have a pilot testing at the moment on actually sharing the data on the best ways to approach certain buildings. For example, a location of the doors and what are specifics on the building. So the cargo logistics themselves would reveal to the other ones what they have learned. So this would be based on the open data. And also what we are looking is that how efficiently our delivery parking spots working. So monitoring and giving data on really to justify whether there is really a need for more of those or whether we should have a system that actually increases the efficiency. So these are at least what we are doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. One question's entered again to Jeffrey. Just a moment, I have to look where it is. What is the approach used in order to identify capacity distribution between car sharing and public transport? Jeffrey, you can say something about that?
Yes. So again, I would also talk about MobiHubs, because in our vision, and also in the vision of Flanders, for instance, MobiHubs are playing an essential role in the future sustainable mobility, not only for today, but also if you're talking about automatic transport and so on, and self-driving cars. MobiHubs could be also a very big success for it. So if you are making sure that public transport is always connected to MobiHub, then with technology and data today, it's perfect. It perfectly makes sense to, for instance, let people know when there is an overcapacity on public transport, and showing them another alternative route and an alternative transport mode to get to their destination. For instance, the bus is fully booked, and now I have to go to the other to another city. Well, they can say you can take from here the shared bike to that MobiHub, and there you can take another bus, or there you can take a shared car to the other city or to the train station. So in order to make sure that everybody gets their destination on time, you need to share the data, and you need to have also a lot of capacity of shared cars and shared bikes. Also something I heard in a former speech, that you need to have the physical supply before you can promote it.
But you mean integrated data on a mobility platform where you can then, as a user, share or use your best combination of transports. But as from a very user perspective, also maybe you can say something to that, Stella. I mean, if I look my trip behavior or transport pattern behavior, then it's really routine, you know, and I can hardly imagine that I will make my choices for transport always looking on this multimodal information and then following their advices. Maybe if I like to use public transport and I see that this transport or this bus is full, then I will wait for another one, and so on. Is that old-fashioned thinking with these routines, or what do you think? Also, Jeffrey and also Stella.
Yes, I think you're a bit old-fashioned. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, well, but I think it perfectly makes sense to say I wait for the next bus. Of course, that could be one of the alternatives. but other alternatives are also very important because maybe I just want to start right now and the alternatives are there. But you don't need to have a smartphone for that matter, because in Flanders we are working with digital MobiHub pilers. So it's a kind of touch screen, and there you can see when the next bus is coming, but also what is the supply of car sharing and bike sharing in the neighborhood. And you also, but it's not working yet, but we are also making a dynamic route planner on those pilers.
Stella?
Well, I think getting really visuals on the streets and on the urban space is really important. I mean, it's not going to be going directly to the digital side. And I think it's very important to realize that we also need to cater to the elderly people, and also to lure some of the customers who have not maybe used or will not pop up in the mobile area. So we really need to have that in the physical landscape, visuals about car sharing or whatever opportunities there are, and this needs to be somehow also taken into account. Very important part.
I agree.
Yes, Alexandra. Alexandra?
Yep. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to come back to one thing I think Stella said, to change behavior, and that is what you mean, I would say, because it would require a change of your mobility behavior, is we need to point out the benefits, and also to provide in the beginning some incentives to change your behavior. And that's also what we need in the logistics sector, because this behavior in the field of logistics also need a change. And therefore we are also working on, okay, how can we emphasize the benefits of cooperation? How can we emphasize the benefits of using more environmentally friendly vehicles?
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. Now I'm coming to a last question to Stella. What criteria should you use to select between different operators in order to have a sustainable car sharing system? Maybe it's also, you can also answer, Jeffrey, maybe you can also answer that. Stella, you would like to say something like that?
Maybe we are not the good example yet in the city of Turku. I mean, we have had for several years a very old-fashioned parking policy, which has not had the permissions for the car sharing cars. And this was just newly renewed after a long process where we renewed all of the other parking areas. And we are now reaching the point where we are able to give the new permissions for the car sharing companies in the city of Turku. So far we have at the moment only a few car sharing companies with few cars, and those are mainly with the housing cooperatives or only for the use of for certain organizations. But I would say that, I mean, the main thing is that we treat it equally, and we have, for example, parking policies that are applicable to all of the operators. And also what I find it really important, and what we've been discussing is a lot, is how do we actually make joint marketing and communication towards the customers so that they can find the most appropriate car sharing companies or bike sharing or ride sharing, whatever opportunities there are. So how can they find them? Because knowing that it takes several years to really get it booming. So this is important factors that we work together in order to market.
Okay. Jeffrey, yes, and then I have another question for you, Jeffrey. Yes, can you answer on that also?
Well, I think it's very important that cities understand the different impact of different car sharing types. Because as I said, it's important that you have a mix of car sharing types, but it doesn't mean that you need to incentivize every car sharing system on the same manner. We are from the point of view that the more impact you create as a provider, the more incentives that you can gain. So for instance, a free floating car doesn't need a dedicated parking spot. No, but maybe they need a parking permit for the whole city. Mm-hmm. Also, car sharing amongst neighbors They don't need a parking permit for the other side of town, but they need a parking permit for their neighborhood. So in that way, you can have some criteria who make some differences between car sharing providers. And you are working on the mix in that way.
This leads me also to the next question. From Annika, you mentioned in your speech that car sharing should be directed on a national policy level. But parking policy are often made on a city's level, you know, and it's crucial also for car sharing. What can be done on a national level in terms of parking policies?
Yeah, well, I think on the national level, you need to have a general framework. The details can be different from city to city, so that's important. But on speaking on parking spots, for instance, the national government needs to make sure that there is a legal ground to make free parking spots on public terrain for public domain for car sharing providers, for instance, and that's all. The rest, the criteria and so on, that can be done on a local level. But the strength of a national framework is that local governments shouldn't be busy with deciding this is a good car sharing company or not, and the car sharing companies can do what they are best in, namely their core business. They just have to make one proposal, and then when they are recognized, they can do their strength, making sure car sharing is on the field.
Mm. So this reminds me to the approach that we have in order to select bike sharing systems. So normally thus in Switzerland it is like this, that if a city decides to make bike sharing, then they make a feasibility study and they are looking where it could be possible that you can make bike sharing spots on public ground. And then this is the base of a tender where they invite different bike sharing providers with other conditions to offer their offer, you know, and then it will be selected. Then once one is selected, then he on terms of market aspect, he can already decide if they use certain spots or not, which are given from the public authority. Is that an approach that you can also think about car sharing? Which is
yes, I think so. You can decide as a local government to have a few providers and not everybody. And a tender is a good way. In Flanders, we are working with tenders, but it's very important to have more than one system for as far as I'm concerned, because then you will have more target people who will make use of the system.
But do you think if you have more different providers, you think the market is big enough in the city to have different providers, or is that the consequence that you have to support the city have to support them more than 3 years because they are concurrencing them each other?
Well, I think if you can't see positive points after 3 years, then I think it doesn't work. So you have to be honest also with yourself and with the provider. That's one. And secondly, I think car sharing provider needs to seek their own unique selling point. And it means that they serve different target groups. Nowadays, the target group for car sharing is rather similar everywhere. It's higher educated people who are living in the city most of the time, 2 earners in the family, and so on and so on. So in order to make a viable business model, car sharing providers need to look for other unique selling points. And that's maybe the biggest mistake car sharing providers nowadays are making. They see there is one or two systems which are successful and they try to copy it. But my suggestion should be, don't copy it, make it your own thing. And then you can see that a lot of different car sharing companies can live in the same city. Also, we have to think about data sharing and about a kind of interoperable system that makes it possible that one user, one member can use different systems, different car sharing systems or shared bike systems with one app or with one subscription. I'm not really talking about mobility as a service, that's the next step, but it would be very good when you have one membership for car sharing, and it doesn't matter which company you are using.
Okay. And maybe then also a card which you can also be member for a bike service and so on. No? Okay, so we are coming to the end. It's 10 minutes left on my watch, so I would like to stress a little bit on this COVID-19 situation that we have, and also about the future of transport and mobility. So what you three think about, also talking from your themes, also what are the most crucial points, or what are the most challenges for mobility management or for the future of transport, or the most chances where we can have. So I think I would like to start with Alexandra. Yes,
Okay.
Alexandra?
Okay. Of course, as we have seen now due to the crisis, we have a trend to even more usage of e-commerce and online ordering of goods. And I think what is of importance to raise the awareness of people what amount of transport is triggered by ordering goods online in all over the world, from different countries, from different continents, because as far as I have seen it in discussions with people, most of the cases they do not consider that it causes a lot more transport if they order goods just one at a day during the week than ordering a number of goods from one company at one point in time. And the other thing which to my mind requires a change is also the transport policy of companies, because even if you order several goods at one company at the same point in time, it may happen that you get 3 or 4 deliveries separately. And so I think the awareness which amount of traffic is caused by how we are doing transport nowadays and ordering nowadays needs a change.
So that means in terms of action that we have to make more awareness campaigns on this theme. Do you mean that?
Yeah, on the one hand, more awareness. On the other hand, it might also be necessary to think also about really giving the transports or assigning the costs of transport really to the transport action, and not hide it in the overall goods price.
Okay.
So this could also be one thing that could make sense.
Yes, I'm sure that that would make sense, but it's also politically a very hard field. Stella, your main indications or information which you would like to address taking account the consideration, the situation that we have now?
I think in order to have the results that we want and to be achieved through our strategies and plans, we need to be more aware of the data and more add value to what we know and base a lot more of our decisions on the data than we actually base on our feelings. So as a city, so this is also really important that we benefit from that, because we need to measure more what is the impact and what is really actually an effect on that one. So we really need to understand the reasons why people are doing this and go behind sort of the user profiles and understand the behavior changes. And I think through the virus, a lot of people are also questioning their own habits, and then they are willing to walk and cycle more. And I really don't want to stop that, because majority of the trips are trips less than 3 kilometers, for example, in the case of Turku, and that is really a car trip in vain. So you wouldn't really need to do that. And I would really like to see happening that they are also starting to understand their impact. And this is partly towards the logistic issue that Alexandra was raising. It's really important to really question your own behavior. And in this, campaigning is a crucial thing, and cities can do a lot on that.
Okay. Jeffrey?
Well, I would say making brave choices. That's important. Today, we see a lot of governments with good intentions, but they want to make sure that public transport is great, and biking is great, and sharing is great, but they also support privately owned cars. So that's not possible. So you need to be aware that you have to stop subsidizing privately owned cars. For instance, in Belgium, we have the so-called salary car, which makes a car a part of your wage you earn when working. Well, that has to stop, because that's a not fair competition comparing with public transport and other modes. And another thing in making choices is also on the field of space. We see that public space is limited, especially in cities, and especially in the corona crisis. We saw it. We need to have social distancing, but if you are walking, it's not possible to cross each other in 1.5 meter distance. So local governments need to make choices about the place of the privately owned car. So I would say place them outside the neighborhoods, maybe in parking lots, neighborhood parking lots, and leave the space for walking and biking. And of course, shared mobility is a perfect match if you are taking those choices. So that would be my advice: make brave choices.
Okay, that's really a clear statement from you, Pat. So we are finishing now. I think it was a very interesting debate, and I hope also that the audience could use and could profit from the indication of our speakers. I would like to thank to you, Alexandra, for your contribution, to you, Stella, also, and also to you, Jeffrey. Thanks also to the organizers from Cascais, and I would like to recommend you to follow the next debates of Econ 2020 on a virtual level. The next debate will be on the 16th of June at 10 o'clock Central European time about the future of mobility, disruptive technology create new realities. So thanks a lot to all for listening, for participating, and I hope that we will see you or hear you again at the next debate, 16th of June, 10 o'clock Central European time.